I'm going to tell you how the marches began. The summer of 1966, when the Chicago Freedom Movement kicked into high gear, will long be remembered as a time of civil rights marches into hostile white neighborhoods. But those marches were never on the movement's additional agenda. Here's what actually happened. One phase of the Chicago Freedom Movement's housing agenda was aimed at achieving open occupancy, as it was called then, by showing up the nature of housing discrimination by the real estate industry and the toothlessness of Chicago's open housing ordinance. The agenda began by testing real estate agencies to determine racial steering. We carefully selected white communities that were at least 1 mile from the racial boundary streets, such as Ashland Avenue in the South at that time, and a median economic level that the typical Black family could afford. A white couple would go to a local real estate office to see what apartments might be available in the neighborhood, followed by a Black couple and then another white couple. As expected, the white couple would be shown places only in a white section. The Black pair would only be shown something in the Black sector and told nothing else was available. Then the second white couple would again be shown something only in a white neighborhood. A report of this was made to the Chicago Commission on Human Relations, which had the responsibility under the ordinance for sanctioning the real estate broker. If nothing happened following the report, a vigil was to be called outside the offending real estate agent. The first agency to be tested, reported, and not sanctioned was F.H. Halverson Real Estate at 63rd and Kedzie, serving the targeted Gage Park neighborhood. A vigil was called late one spring day, and about 100 Black and white demonstrators stood out the agency doors holding placards and singing freedom songs. The Reverends Jesse Jackson and James Bevel were in charge of the program because Dr. King was out of the city and Chicago Freedom Movement co-chair Al Raby was occupied elsewhere. As the day wore on, local whites began gathering near the vigil, heckling and jeering. Towards sundown, the white crowd grew larger and increasingly vociferous, though the police were successful at that point in keeping the group separated. The white crowd grew noisier and noisier and may have begun tossing stones or other small missiles at the demonstrators. It seemed that violence was imminent, all under the glare of TV lights with a full complement of media looking on. I was at that time the Chicago Freedom Movement press secretary, media liaison. It was evident that violence would grow as the dark of night came on. No one wanted to disperse near the angry white crowd. The police then offered an alternative. They would truck the demonstrators away in police wagons. Bevel and Jackson agreed to the deal, and the world was treated to the sight of peaceful civil rights demonstrators filing into the wagons, much like common criminals. The white crowd jeered louder and screamed obscenities at each of the demonstrators climbing into the wagons. We were deposited at the Southside Freedom Center in Inglewood. In the back room, a group of the leadership clustered in grief and embarrassment. Raby returned to the center furious. He said we should have demanded police protection for a march back to the center. He conferred with Dr. King by phone. Brainstorming the issue, I, among others, said that because of the humiliating retreat, the only way to retrieve our dignity and affirm our right to demonstrate peacefully was to plan a march back to the Halverson office from the Freedom Center. Dr. King agreed, and the action was set for 2 days later. That march, led by Raby, planned to go west on 79th Street, then through Marquette Park, then north to the office. But it was met by jeering, rock and bottle throwing white crowds lining 79th Street when we got west of Ashland, then massive violence when the line of march got to the park itself. Cars were burned and run into the pond in the park. The police not only failed to protect, but also seemed to encourage the white youths to carry on the violence. We were stymied at the park. Groups of us sat down and sang. The whites just ahead of us screamed epithets and sang their own racist song parodies. One of them was to the tune of an Oscar Mayer jingle. I'm going to say the word. The saying, "I wish I was an Alabama trooper, then I could kill a nigger fearlessly." With many people hurt by flying missiles, their cars burned, and other damage inflicted because the police failed in their duties to protect us, we headed back to the Freedom Center. Angry whites lined the south side of 79th as we filed on the north side. Then almost magically, things were peaceful as we crossed Ashland. I recall describing the scene by phone later that day to Lou Palmer, who was then a reporter for the old Chicago American. It would be another 2 days before we made the march all the way through Marquette Park and to the Halverson office, this time protected by the Chicago police, who were given orders to do so after the earlier debacle. But they could not fully protect Dr. King, who had returned to Chicago to lead this march. And that was the day he was stunned and briefly felled by a flying brick in the middle of Marquette Park. It's a famous incident. This was also the beginning of a series of marches throughout the summer into a host of hostile white neighborhoods that met our economic and geographic criteria. Our agenda had changed.